What if the very place we send our kids to get smarter actually dulls their minds, stifles their curiosity, and shapes them into something less than their true selves? We all remember school, right? Those classrooms, the textbooks, the endless tests. We're told it's essential, the foundation for a good life. But what if one of history's most famously pessimistic philosophers, Arthur Schopenhauer, saw it all a bit differently? He'd argue that our traditional schooling isn't just imperfect, it's fundamentally flawed, designed in ways that actively undermine our natural intellect and even warp our minds from childhood. If you've ever felt like school forced you into a box, or wondered why so many smart people lose their spark, then you need to hear Schopenhauer's unsettling truth about how our education system often does more harm than good, and what that means for your own thinking. Even today, imagine a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old. Their mind is a wild garden, overflowing with questions, observations, and an insatiable desire to touch, taste, and understand the world through direct experience. Every rustling leaf, every buzzing bee, every broken toy is a profound mystery waiting to be explored. This isn't just cute. It's how Schopenhauer saw our natural intellect at its purest, a vibrant, untamed force of raw understanding. But then, we send them to school. Suddenly, that wild garden is shoved into a neat, sterile greenhouse. The direct experience is replaced with lectures. The questions aren't always welcomed. Sometimes they interrupt the lesson plan. The natural curiosity, this powerful inner drive, starts to encounter a rigid structure, a schedule, and a curriculum. It's like trying to teach a bird to fly by showing it diagrams of wings instead of letting it leap from the nest. Schopenhauer believed that our will, our fundamental desires, our striving, our instinct, is the primary driver of our being. Intellect, for him, isn't some separate, lofty thing that floats above us. No, our intellect is actually a servant to the will. It's a tool the will uses to navigate the world, to achieve its goals, to satisfy its urges. Think about it. You want to eat, your intellect figures out how to get food. You want to understand a complex idea. Your intellect works to grasp it because your will desires that understanding. So what happens when school steps in? It often tries to cultivate intellect independently of the will. It forces children to learn things they have no inner drive or desire to understand. It asks them to memorize dates, formulas, or facts that hold no personal relevance or spark no intrinsic interest. Schopenhauer would say this is like trying to make a tool work without giving it a purpose. You're trying to sharpen a knife that has no intention of cutting anything. The result? A dull, unwilling intellect. It's like trying to push a car uphill when the engine isn't even on. The child might go through the motions, but the deeper, more profound engagement, the kind that actually builds genuine understanding and mental fortitude, simply isn't there because the will isn't truly engaged. This isn't about blaming teachers. It's about a systemic approach. We've built an education system that prioritizes filling heads with information over sparking an internal fire. It values obedience and conformity to a curriculum over the wild, messy, but ultimately more powerful pursuit of knowledge driven by the individual's own will. The consequence is minds that are trained to process, but not necessarily to truly think, not in the deepest, most original sense. Think back to your schooling. How much of what you learned was just rote memorization for a test? How many facts did you cram into your brain only for them to vanish the moment you walked out of the exam room? Schopenhauer would have shaken his head, probably with a grimace. He had a strong distinction between what he called book knowledge and true understanding, or experience knowledge. Book knowledge for him was superficial. It's like having a library full of maps, but never actually venturing out to explore the territory. You know about things, but you don't know them. You can regurgitate definitions, dates, and theories, but you haven't truly integrated them into your own understanding. It hasn't become part of your mental fabric, it's just borrowed information, sitting on the surface of your mind, easily dislodged. Our schools, for the most part, are factories of book knowledge. We're presented with pre-digested information, often stripped of its context, its passion, and its deeper implications. We're told what to think, not how to think. We learn about history from textbooks, but rarely are we encouraged to truly interrogate the past, to step into the shoes of those who lived it, or to see how historical forces shape our present in a visceral, personal way. We learn about science through formulas and experiments in a controlled environment. But rarely are we given the freedom to just observe the natural world, to hypothesize, to fail, and to discover on our own terms. This isn't just inefficient. Schopenhauer saw it as actively damaging. When young minds are constantly fed prepackaged thoughts, they learn to rely on others' ideas. They become less capable of forming their own. It's like a muscle that atrophies from disuse. If you constantly give a child the answers, they stop asking their own questions. If you always show them the path, they never learn to navigate. True understanding, Schopenhauer argued, comes from wrestling with concepts yourself. It comes from experiencing the world, reflecting on it, and forming your own conclusions. It's internal, organic, and deeply personal. It's the difference between being told about the taste of an apple and actually biting into one yourself. Our school system, with its emphasis on standardized curricula and externally imposed learning objectives, often sidesteps this crucial process. It prioritizes the appearance of knowledge, the passing grade, over the deep, lasting imprint of true comprehension. And in doing so, it cultivates a generation that might be well-informed, but is often less capable of independent, critical thought. Have you ever tried to force a complex idea onto someone who just wasn't ready for it? It usually doesn't stick, right? It just bounces off. Schopenhauer saw traditional schooling doing this all the time, especially with young children. He compared it to putting adult clothes on a child. They might technically fit, but they're awkward, ill-suited, and ultimately don't allow for natural movement or growth. He argued that forcing complex philosophical, scientific, or historical concepts into immature minds is not only useless but harmful. A child's mind, particularly their capacity for abstract thought, develops gradually. Trying to explain Kant's categorical imperative to a 6-year-old or the nuances of geopolitical strategy to a 10-year-old isn't going to make them geniuses. It's going to make them bored, confused, and potentially resistant to learning altogether. Their minds simply aren't equipped yet to grasp the depth and interconnectedness of these ideas. What happens instead, according to Schopenhauer, is that children memorize the words, the definitions, the formulas, but without any genuine understanding. They learn to parrot back information, but they don't comprehend it. This leads to what he called mental indigestion. It clogs up the mind with undigested concepts, creating a superficial layer of knowledge that hinders, rather than helps, deeper thought. It's like filling a backpack with rocks instead of nutrient-rich food. It's heavy, but offers no real sustenance. This premature stuffing has a lasting impact. When you've spent years memorizing things you don't understand, you develop a habit of superficial engagement. You learn that the goal isn't necessarily to get it, but to appear to get it. You prioritize performance over understanding. This can lead to a kind of intellectual laziness later in life, where the effort required for genuine inquiry feels too daunting because the foundational habit of deep engagement was never properly cultivated. Instead, Schopenhauer suggested that children should be allowed to learn at their own pace, to explore the world through their senses and experiences, and to build up their understanding organically. They should be presented with ideas when their minds are genuinely ready to grasp them, not according to a predetermined curriculum schedule. It's about letting the mind grow naturally like a plant, rather than trying to force-feed it with intellectual steroids before it's developed its roots. This approach might seem slow to some, but Schopenhauer believed it ultimately leads to a much more robust, profound, and truly original intellect. We often celebrate original thinkers and innovators, but then we send our kids to systems that seem designed to iron out any kinks of individuality. Schopenhauer would see this as a tragic paradox. School, with its emphasis on conformity, standardized answers, and adherence to established curricula, often acts as a powerful suppressor of original thought and genuine creativity. Think about the classroom environment. There's usually a right answer. There's a particular method expected for solving problems. Deviate too far, question the premise too much, or offer an unconventional solution, and you might not get the grade. You might even be labeled disruptive. This isn't necessarily malicious. It's often born of the necessity of managing large groups and delivering a set curriculum. But the effect on individual minds can be profound. When children are constantly told there's a correct way to think, they stop trusting their own internal compass. They learn to seek external validation for their ideas rather than developing the courage and confidence to forge their own paths. They learn that their value often lies in how well they can reproduce information or follow instructions, not in their ability to generate novel insights or challenge existing paradigms. It's like teaching an artist to paint by numbers, then wondering why they never create a masterpiece. Schopenhauer believed that true genius, true originality, comes from a deeply individual and intuitive grasp of the world. It's not something that can be taught or drilled into someone. It's an innate spark that needs freedom to grow, to experiment, to fail, and to find its own expression. When that spark is constantly constrained by rigid structures, fear of failure, especially public failure through grading, and the pressure to conform, it can dim or even extinguish entirely. Our education system often rewards the diligent mimic, the one who can best reproduce what we've been taught. But Schopenhauer argued that this creates what he called scholars, people with extensive book knowledge, but often lacking in genuine independent insight. They are learned, yes, but not necessarily wise or original. The world needs people who can think new thoughts, not just rearrange old ones. And by prioritizing conformity over creativity, our schools risk producing a generation of well-drilled minds, but fewer true pioneers. The suppression of that inner spark of originality is perhaps one of the most insidious ways school can damage the developing mind. Let's be honest. Why do most people go to school? Or more accurately, why do most parents send their kids to school? For a better job, right? To get into a good college, secure a stable future, climb the career ladder. This utilitarian view of education is deeply ingrained in our society. And Schopenhauer would argue it's another fundamental flaw that distorts our minds. He believed that education, in its purest form, should be about cultivating wisdom, about understanding the world, ourselves, and the human condition. It should be about fostering independent thought and a genuine love for truth. But our modern system, driven by economic needs and societal expectations, largely divorces learning from wisdom. It trains you for a function, not for a life fully lived. We learn subjects because they're required for college or because they're seen as practical for certain careers. History is taught as a series of facts and dates to remember, not as a living narrative that helps us understand human folly and triumph. Philosophy, if it's taught at all, often feels like an obscure academic exercise rather than a powerful tool for self-reflection and navigating life's biggest questions. Even science is often presented as a collection of established facts and methodologies, rather than an ongoing, thrilling exploration of the unknown. When the primary goal of education becomes utility, getting a job, making money, then the kind of knowledge valued shifts. Deep, critical thinking, the pursuit of profound truths, or even just the joy of learning for its own sake, often takes a back seat. The focus becomes measurable outcomes, grades, diplomas, job placements. This turns learning into a means to an end rather than an end in itself. Schopenhauer argued that this instrumental approach to education fundamentally misunderstands the nature of the mind and the purpose of human existence. It treats individuals as cogs in a larger machine, preparing them to perform specific tasks, rather than nurturing them as complete, thinking beings capable of leading meaningful lives. The mind, instead of being a vessel for wisdom and independent thought, becomes a repository of skills and information designed to meet external demands. This can lead to a profound sense of emptiness, even for those who achieve success by society's metrics, because their intellectual journey was never truly their own. They were educated to be useful, not to be wise. Imagine a world where learning isn't judged by a letter grade, where asking a silly question isn't embarrassing but celebrated, where making a mistake isn't a mark of failure but a stepping stone to understanding. That sounds pretty different from most of our school experiences, doesn't it? Schopenhauer would argue that the pervasive system of grading and evaluation profoundly damages our relationship with knowledge and instills a deep-seated fear of not knowing. From a very young age, we're taught that our worth, in an academic sense, is tied to how well we perform on tests. A low grade often means failure, disappointment, or even punishment. This creates an environment where avoiding errors becomes paramount. The goal isn't necessarily to learn, but to avoid being wrong. This is a crucial distinction. When the fear of failure overshadows the joy of discovery, genuine learning suffers. Schopenhauer would say this system turns knowledge into a burden rather than a gift. Instead of seeing questions as opportunities for exploration, we see them as potential pitfalls. Instead of embracing the vastness of what we don't know as an invitation to learn more, we see it as a threat to our academic standing. This stunts curiosity. Why ask a truly probing question if it might expose a gap in your knowledge and lead to a bad grade? Why experiment with a new approach if the established method guarantees a passing score? The grade trap teaches us that external validation is more important than internal understanding. We become adept at giving the right answers, even if we don't fully grasp why they're right. We learn to perform for the system rather than genuinely engaging with the material. This creates a kind of intellectual cowardice, where we shy away from challenging ideas, from admitting ignorance, and from the messy, uncertain process of true inquiry. This isn't just about school. It's about how this mindset carries into adulthood. How many times have you avoided asking a question in a meeting or shied away from exploring a new topic because you're afraid of looking stupid? That's the lingering shadow of the grade trap. It trains us to value the appearance of competence over the honest pursuit of understanding, ultimately diminishing our capacity for genuine intellectual growth and the courage to truly think for ourselves. Schopenhauer believed that the true lover of wisdom isn't afraid to say, "I don't know," or to make mistakes, because those are the very springboards for genuine learning. All right? So Schopenhauer painted a pretty bleak picture of traditional education. It's easy to feel a bit cynical about it all. But he wasn't just a critic. His philosophy offers some powerful implications for what a more mind-enhancing, rather than mind-destroying approach to learning might look like. It's not about throwing out all structure, but about fundamentally shifting our priorities. First, imagine an education that respects the primacy of the will. Instead of forcing children to learn things they have no interest in, we'd focus on nurturing their intrinsic curiosity. What questions are they asking? What are they fascinated by? Learning would become less about rigid curricula and more about providing resources and guidance for students to pursue their own intellectual passions. When the will is truly engaged, learning isn't a chore, it's an unstoppable force. Second, ditch the reliance on book knowledge alone. Schopenhauer would advocate for learning through direct experience, observation, and critical reflection. Less memorization, more doing. Less being told what happened, more analyzing sources and drawing your own conclusions. This means more hands-on projects, more open-ended inquiry, more time spent in the real world, and less time simply absorbing information passively. It's about letting students grapple with ideas, make mistakes, and discover truths for themselves, rather than just being handed them. Third, a truly Schopenhauerian education would embrace the idea that minds mature at different rates. No more premature stuffing. Instead, concepts would be introduced when a student is genuinely ready to comprehend them, allowing for a deeper, more organic understanding to form. This might mean personalized learning paths or environments where students can explore concepts at their own pace, rather than being rushed through standardized benchmarks. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, a Schopenhauerian approach would free us from the tyranny of the grade. Imagine learning environments where the goal isn't to get a letter, but to genuinely understand, where mistakes are seen as crucial feedback, not failures, where intellectual honesty and the courage to admit "I don't know" are more valued than having all the right answers. This would foster a love of learning for its own sake, creating truly independent thinkers who aren't afraid to challenge, to question, and to pursue wisdom as an end in itself. It's a radical idea, far removed from our current system, but it suggests that reclaiming our minds from the destructive habits of traditional schooling isn't impossible. It starts with recognizing how those habits were formed, and then intentionally cultivating an inner drive for true understanding. So, we've walked through Schopenhauer's pretty stark critique of how traditional schooling, from a young age, can actually suppress our natural intellect and warp our minds. We talked about how it often ignores our innate will, prioritizes shallow book knowledge over deep understanding, prematurely stuffs young minds with concepts they're not ready for, and stifles the very originality we claim to value. We also dove into how the constant pressure of grading fosters a fear of not knowing, rather than a love of learning. But remember, his philosophy also points towards a different path, one where curiosity is paramount, experience is the true teacher, and wisdom is pursued for its own sake, not just for a job. What do you think? Did school help or hinder your natural curiosity? Drop a comment below and share your own experiences or thoughts on Schopenhauer's ideas. And if you're interested in exploring more philosophical takes on everyday life, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell.